Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us to another episode of Ministering Over Fostering. We are super excited for our season 2 and all of these amazing speakers. And today I have an extra large smile because one of my great friends is here today, my friend Yeny, and she has so much information to provide to us. But before I get into everything that she does, I'm going to just let her tell us about herself. So, Yeny, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your credentials and the work that you do and what brought you here today.
Thank you both, Myra and Lakeisha, for having me here and allowing me to talk about a subject that I'm very passionate about. So my name is Jenny, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. I have worked most of my career in the medical field as a medical social worker. Currently, I serve in the role of palliative care, which in essence is a specialty in the medical field that focuses on individuals who have an illness and they're seeking treatment and they need support with symptom management. That can be physical, mental, or spiritual. So my role is mental and emotional support. And then I also serve as a hospice social worker, which serves the population of individuals whose bodies have entered end of life despite medical treatments. And with whatever time they have left, they want to be able to focus on being surrounded by whoever they want and not spend so much time in going to medical appointments and scans and all of that the medical field can offer, but spend time with what they define as quality. So I serve both roles, and because of both roles, I have the privilege of walking alongside individuals who experience a lot of grief and loss. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that information. And I have to tell you that I just admire the work that you do. I can't imagine, Lakeisha and I are social workers, and we've heard other people tell us we can't imagine the work you do, but really spending time with so many people who are suffering and going through some of that in their families. I can imagine it takes a very special person to do that. So thank you for the work that you do. We really appreciate you doing that.
I wanted to chime in too and just say thank you for what you do, because my grandfather actually was in hospice at his home. And I just remember there were amazing people coming in and out of the house and really just loving on not only him, but my grandmother and the rest of our family during that time. So thank you. It's not an easy job. So bless you, and just thank you for the type of spirit that you have to even work with that population.
Thank you so much. I have to say that, like we all have our strengths. And I believe that it was given to us. And one of the wonderful things that for me is serving people who are entering specifically for hospice at end of life has taught me how to live, and that it creates the context that life is short and that time passes, and how we choose to live our lives each day will help us live the best possible life that we can, so that as years pass by, we can look back and say, man, all the things that I lived, and I lived it the most that I can. So it has brought a lot of perspective of what's important in life. And I am so grateful for the opportunity, because I didn't necessarily choose this field. This field chose me. And so I am very grateful for that. But thank you for your words.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful perspective, because you're surrounded by what comes at the end. So it's very real and it can happen at any time. And so that's one of the reasons why we brought you here today, Jenny, is because I tell you that you're an expert in grief. You tell me you're not, but you are. And so we wanted to bring somebody in that has a lot of experience, because grief is not something that's easy to talk about. A lot of people shy away from it. And really, culturally speaking, we're one of the few cultures that want to avoid the topic of grief or the topic of death. And it's such a normal part of life. It's a normal part of our cycle that we're all going to experience, or we're going to experience someone in our family that has experienced a large loss. We've experienced loss and grief in different ways. But we want to ask you today if you can tell us a little bit about grief, because when I think of grief, I think of someone dying, but I think there's a lot more complexity to grief. So if you can tell us that, and then what are the stages of grief that you can share with us?
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, because many times when people think about grief, they think the passing of someone that they knew or a loved one. And I came across this definition several years ago, and I loved how simple it was for me to understand it, and also how it covered different areas of grief. So one area can be the loss, can be physical, like the death of a loved one. But then it can also be social, like when there is a family and the family it's ruptured for whatever reason. So that can bring a lot of grief. Either can be a divorce, or it can be, for example, in the context of the population that you ladies serve, the removing myself from what I call family. That is also a lot of grief and loss. And it can be occupational. For example, well, it can be like a job, but in the context of foster children, it can be moving from school to school, not having security of these are my friends, this is my community, because I'm constantly moving. So that can bring a lot of grief and loss. And Elizabeth Elliot is a person who wrote a lot about grief and loss because she herself experienced it. And she said that grief and loss can bring a lot of suffering. And she defined suffering as having what we don't want, or wanting what we don't have. So many times we suffer because this is not the decisions that I wanted, but other people made for me, and now I'm paying the consequences of that. And it can also be, now I'm here in this situation and this is great, but I look back and all of the things that I went through to get here and how much suffering I experienced. There is a psychiatrist, and her name was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she was a pioneer in death studies. So in essence, what that means is that she served a lot of people who were at the end of life. And through her experience serving, she saw that people experienced what we call the 5 stages of grief, which is not necessarily that is one, like, it's not cumulative, which means that one then goes after, but it's common experiences people have. And she defined the first stage as denial. And denial can be seen in a couple of ways. One is when I do not believe that what has occurred. So I'm just like, nope, it's not happening, or this is not true. But then there's the other side of denial where we can undermine what has happened. So I can say, oh, what happened to me as a child, it was not a big deal. It helped me grow. It helped me. And we undermine the pain and the suffering. So that can be seen in a form of denial. The other experience is anger. So anger, I think we can relate to that feeling where it's just this passionate feeling that I'm just angry, that I don't like what's happening. And I recently heard a definition of anger when a person feels that my right has been violated. And that's when I experience anger. So it can be seen my right as a child to have security and to have parents that were there who were meant to protect me and to provide all my needs were not there. And I feel angry towards that. Then there's the other stage is negotiation. And that's if religion or faith is something that is important to me, then it can be seen as I'm gonna pray more, I'm gonna fast more, I'm gonna read more so that my circumstances can change. So it's a sense where if there's something that I can do to change what's happening around me. So I negotiate, or maybe I'll be a better citizen, and this is how I'm going to do it, however that looks like for each of us individually. Then there's depression. And with depression, and I want to say that there's a difference between I'm feeling depressed and then I'm clinically depressed, because there's a difference. And in order for me to have clinical depression, it's because somebody who knows about the depression is able to see the signs and symptoms and ask questions and say, for how long has this been happening, for me to then have a diagnosis of clinical depression. And then there's the sensation of feeling depressed that I feel sad. There is a sense of hopelessness, not necessarily ongoing, but there's moments where I feel hopeless. And what the wonderful thing about depression is that it's treatable, and if it's clinical depression. But then also I learned this from one of the persons that I'm currently serving, and he provided authorization for me to share his story. And he is experiencing a lot of grief and loss because he has stage 4 cancer. So he's on medications to try to prolong his life. And he goes through cycles of depression, not clinical depression, but depression, because he is grieving what he thought he would be living at his age, but he's not. And the wonderful thing that he shared, which I love, is that he understands the nature of emotions, which is they have their highs and their lows. So it's not a constant thing. And the last stage with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, acceptance. And acceptance, it can be defined as understanding that death and changes that we didn't ask for are part of life, that we all experience it in different ways. So I accept that this is happening. Now with the stages of grief, we might go over, like we might be in denial and then acceptance, and then we feel anger, and then we feel depressed. So it's not a linear process, and we can go through the cycle many times. Now there was a gentleman whose name was David Klessler, and he worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and he in his serving learned, or he incorporated another stage, which is finding meaning. And that is what both of you ladies have done, because both Sandra and Lois passed away. And when you go to your website, you talk about them. And out of their lives and their passion and their love, you're honoring their lives by creating this agency and naming it after them. So that can be an example of meaning. But if, for example, if I haven't had someone who has passed away, but I've gone through the foster care system, and what's the meaning of all of this? One way, because I also had the opportunity to talk to someone, my aunt was a foster mother, and we kept in touch with one of the kids that came over to her house. And it's really trying to, this is what happened to my childhood, and I had no control over it. And now I'm a little bit older, so how can I live my life to honor that child that was deeply hurt? And that can be a form of finding meaning.
I think you said so much information, Jenny, about a lot of things, but one of the things that stood out to me, I think the most out of everything, was how you said that one of the things that we can do is, if something happens to us that's out of our control, like we tend to feel like, why did this happen, right? What can I do with what this happened? Someone chose this for me, and I'm living the consequences of this. And I think that for a lot of the youth that we serve, probably most of them, that's what happened. Someone made decisions, or lack of decisions, that now I have this life and this path, and I don't know what to do with it now. It was chosen for me. But to hear this acceptance and finding meaning, when things are chosen for us, we do get to have control back. And what we do with that control once we find it is what gives us the opportunity to do so many things. And I think Lakeisha and I have gone through a lot of grief. I've gone through grief in my childhood, and I've also lost people that I love. I think last year at our church, we lost like almost maybe close to 20 people that we knew. Some of them we were really, really close to. Some of them we knew just from being members of our church. But you experience so much heaviness and these emotions. And to get to a space where you can say, yes, that happened, and yes, it still hurts, and it's probably changed me forever. I may never be the same version of me that I was in the past after this, but what do I do with this new version? What do I want? Where do I take this? And what can I do with it so that I can help people and it doesn't feel like this happened to me and I've lost all the control that I had in my life?
I love the fact that you brought up that it can happen in stages and continue to happen, and it can happen in various ways. And I think that a lot of times when you talk to people, they expect you to go through this grieving process and to get over it really quickly. And it's okay. You've had enough time. It's okay. Move along, right? And that's not the case. So thank you for bringing that up, because I know even with a lot of our youth, there's things that might bring up the grieving process, right? That might trigger it. Even holidays, food sometimes. Those are birthdays. We see that a lot. Like birthdays, they should be time to celebrate, but no, it's another holiday that they are no longer with their biological family. So thank you for bringing that up, because this is something that everybody needs to be aware of this process.
And I think it helps us be patient and kind with ourselves, because sometimes we want to not feel certain ways. Like we always want to feel happy. And sometimes when we get triggered, there might be this perception that we're not healed. Because if I were to be healed, then I wouldn't experience it. But we're human. And sometimes we are living in chapter 20 in our lives, and like a birthday comes up and we go back to chapter 8 when I was 8 years old, and this happened, and all of a sudden I'm triggered. But it means that I'm in chapter 8, but I can bring my brain back. No, I'm in chapter 20, and this is what I've lived, and this is how much I've grown, and this is what I'm doing, again, to honor myself. In your case, both of you are honoring your loved ones. Is that what are we going to do with what we have control over? Because many times I've spent time and energy in something that I have no control over. And it gets so confusing, and then I start beating myself up because I have an ideal of how I should look like. And in a sense, it's kind of, I need to step back and start questioning myself of what am I viewing in my head that I should be in, and then what is it that I'm living. So yes, and grief is messy. It is a messy process, but and that is not neat and packaged and a bow and we're done, but it's more like it's growing pains, because we do grow from, if we choose to.
One of the questions that we have for you, Jenny, and I think this is a great transition from what you just spoke about, because grief is very messy, and that's what typical grief should look like, right? If it's very put together, something might be wrong. Like if you were able to put it away, or if you weren't able to acknowledge it or feel it or give space to all of the emotions that we talked about, the anger, the depression, the denial, and you may not experience all of them, but you should be experiencing some of them with any type of grief. So when I think of unresolved grief, I think of someone who maybe didn't give space for grief, or it was just put away and suppressed. What we do find in the work that Lakeisha and I do is that oftentimes our children or youth don't even know that grief is a concept, or they haven't been given the space, or they haven't been safe enough to feel it, because maybe I'm moving from one place to another and I just haven't found stability in somewhere where I can actually start to process everything that's happened to me. And so we get into a space of unresolved grief. So I'm wondering if you can share with us what unresolved grief, how can that affect us if we don't give space for it?
Right. So one of the things is that humans, we cope. And what I mean by that is that when there's a lot of pain and it's really hard to go to those places, what we can do is that we can try to push it in the back of our minds. So just because it's here, it doesn't mean that it's gone. It's that it's not here. And for example, denial can be a part of coping because I'm just pushing it and pushing it and pushing it to the back. But the human body is very interesting how it works. So our mental health is not like the subcategory or different from our physical health or from our even spiritual health. So many times what happens when I'm not ready or I don't feel safe or I don't want to go there to process what has happened is that other areas start talking, like kind of raising those red flags where it's like, okay, so we're not ready to deal with this part. How about we send a signal to this part? And then maybe that will catch the attention. No, okay, let's go to this other part. So it starts talking. So how that looks like is that people then can fall into a depression. And that's when we talk about clinical depression, where our mental health, it's carrying this pain and this wound, like emotional and mental wound, and it needs attention. And it's kind of like, I'm trying, but I just can't. I kind of like, I'm tired. So I'm going to go into the clinical depression. And that can be seen as we are overeating or undereating, we're sleeping too much, or we have insomnia. Then we find that life is black and white. There's no color. There's no hope. Then that's when suicide can start coming in. And what I like to say when we talk about suicide is that can be a symptom of depression and it can be a symptom of anxiety. And when we experience depression or anxiety, we don't say, oh, I want this symptom, and that symptom. It's not like a combo that we can say X, Y, and Z. It just comes up. And a symptom is suicide. And that's a very, very dangerous symptom because if an attempt is made and an attempt is carried through, then life ends. So suicide can be, it can affect us in the long run if we don't deal with the grief. We can have self-destructive behaviors. So going back to coping, because I want to numb pain, and I'm not sure if we've heard of the term chemical coping, which is we cope with chemicals. That can be drugs, that can be alcohol, that can be painkillers, that can be fentanyl, that can be working out, or that can be like going to the gym or consuming ourselves at work in the term workaholic, because we're trying to numb. And then our bodies can do that for a period of time, but then our bodies get tired. And so these things start affecting us in different areas because humans, we were created emotional beings. And because we're emotional beings, our emotions are not our enemies. Our emotions are meant to let us know, hey, pay attention to me, please, because this is important. And when we address them and we look at them, then we can do something about them. But if we don't, then they will start affecting areas. We can be very tired, very fatigued. They become somatic, right? The emotional component that starts sending signals to the physical component. And I'm always tired. I'm always fatigued. I don't want to go out. I want to, and there's moments where we want to just be by ourselves, right? But then if it starts being a pattern, then those are red flags.
I've also heard that part of the physical component too, with any type of stressor or trauma or problem with mental health that's not addressed, that you can also get medical conditions. Like your body can actually experience an illness and there may not be any notification as to what caused it, but it could just be like stressors that you're holding on to or trauma. I don't know if that's the case, if you know about that.
Yeah, there's actually, I learned this because I work with nurse practitioners and doctors, and it's like a little sponge. And one of the diagnoses that it's called fibromyalgia, and that's body aches all over the body. And one of the reasons that I was told that people get diagnosed with fibromyalgia is that they run all these tests to determine what's the cause of the pain. And everything comes out clean. And in a sense, there's no reason that they can see that causes pain. So the person then gets diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and it's believed because it's psychosocial pain that gets transferred to the physical pain, and that's how it manifests itself. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who has fibromyalgia is because it's emotional, mental pain, but that's one of the things that is wondered upon. And then you get headaches, you get stomach problems. Our GI system is considered the second brain because it feels everything. So people then might have constipation, they might have diarrhea, they start having back pains, they start having headaches, tension headaches, grinding of the teeth, because the body talks. So it affects each other. Just like when somebody's experiencing physical pain, it's not uncommon for them to feel a form of anxiety or depression because they're in physical pain, because we're interconnected.
Amazing. So incredible how our bodies, and I know there's a very famous book out there that says my body keeps the score, and it really is true. Our bodies, in some way, shape, or form, this is going to come out. And that's why it's important to process the grief and not leave it unresolved.
I was just thinking how interesting that is, what you just explained about the body carrying on a lot of these symptoms. That's why some of the doctors can't diagnose, so to speak, because I've actually seen it with other people before. So that's pretty interesting that you brought that up.
And like, I personally work with a team, which is the nurse practitioner, the chaplain, myself, because we acknowledge that there are different types of pains. And sometimes we don't grow up learning about different types of pain. But we are able to acknowledge physical pain because it's physical. But sometimes the problem's not the physical, that's the symptom, because the problem starts either in the spiritual area or emotional, mental area. So it's kind of taking into consideration that we are very complete in so many areas, and that one area can affect the other.
Going back, now that you're bringing this up, before I got into social work years ago, I used to work at a school district in the health office. And I felt like sometimes this would be common with young children. They would come in, and even though, and some of the times it wasn't just an excuse, but you can tell like something is wrong, but not really. And they would take on these like pain. Oh, I have this pain here. And, nothing is wrong, but they are overworking themselves up too, which is creating these pains. So yeah, I've definitely seen that in the school district with the younger kids too. And that can even go as far as like maybe being bullied or anything like that that's going on. And they're now, experiencing this pain as if they were quote unquote sick.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. I think for me, it's kind of a blessing in disguise, because if I don't know how to differentiate one from the other, the body will talk. So it will let me know, hey, address this one way or another. So that it goes back to, we can try to ignore it as much as we can. Eventually, the body has its limits and it will come up.
yeah, I can't stay hidden forever. At some point, one of the communication pieces is going to shout out and say, you need to fix this. And if it has to be addressed, if I'm showing you some physical discomfort, and then you can get to the root issue if that's the case, or if you're addressing the root issue and then there's physical pain afterwards, whatever it looks like, but in some way, shape, or form, it's going to come out and your body's going to tell you you need to address whatever it is. But I do love the holistic approach that you guys take, because one of the major foundations that Lakeisha and I have for the agency is viewing the child as a whole, the young person as a whole, and bringing in a holistic approach to their treatment. It's not just providing housing and their basic needs, right? Because we can provide that very easily, but it's also providing a space where they can feel safe to address some of the mental health problems, where we can address spirituality if that's something that they want to address as well. And we've had some young people sit with us and start asking questions about spirituality because they know they feel safe to do that. So there's so much more to a person. We're complex beings. And if we focus on one thing, we're missing out on all of the other pieces that compose us and make us who we are. So I love that you guys have a holistic approach, because there are different pains.
Oh, yeah. And it makes a huge difference when we address them.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that we had for you that you've already addressed is that children and youth who have been exposed to the foster care system, they do experience grief and loss because of all of the traumas, the separation from their homes, and the changes. So if they've been moved from one place to another, from schools, they lose friends. There's just a lot of grief surrounding the foster care system. So I'm wondering if we have youth that watch this channel. We have a lot of them that will watch, they're going to watch this episode, and we may hear from some of them afterwards. If they're listening today, what is some advice that you can give their resource parents first? Because we want to talk to the resource parents that this is real. Now they know that someone in their home may be experiencing, most likely is experiencing some type of grief, let's say that, right? So can we start with the resource parents? What advice would you give to foster parents on how they can address this, or how they can open up the conversation about grief with children in their home?
So preparing for this interview, I contacted my aunt, and I just wanted to hear from her, because she was a parent who opened her home and had so many children come in, and I was part of that process. She was a foster mother who served for over 10 years, and she had like over 170 children, which in that amount of time is not that many children that went through her home, but it was because of how she took care and she served. And talking to her, we were reminded of so many experiences. And I think it's very important to acknowledge as a resource parent that there's a lot of things that we can assume that have happened, but there's a lot of things that we don't know that has happened in each child that goes through the home. And obviously there's things that we know, that the child was removed from the home for whatever reason. And that is very traumatic, because as children, we don't really have control over who we're going to go with and where we're going to go. We're just very vulnerable. So now we're going into a home that the children, the family dynamics, meaning how does the household run and who's in charge and what are the routines, and all. So this is like a whole bunch of learning in a short period of time. So one of the things that my aunt did, and I actually have videos of this, is that we had one kid, and he's the one that I told you that I still keep in contact with. He came into our house, and I talked to him too, and he had been in over 20 houses before he came to my aunt. And it was his 16th birthday. And birthdays are a big deal because sometimes they're never acknowledged. Many times they're never acknowledged from the stories that we got. we heard, because so many children, and we would hear terrible stories and a lot of trauma of like food scarcity and not knowing if when can they have food. Some parents decided to lock their fridge and they would get thirsty, so they would have to drink water out of the faucet from the restroom because they didn't have access to filtered water. So all of those things. So it's all of that maybe they're not sharing, and they're coming into their home and they're just scared. And so how can we help them be a part of our family? And in my family, what we decided is that we threw a birthday party for him. There was other children in the home. We bought water balloons and we had a water balloon fight. And that meant so much to him because nobody had acknowledged his birthday. And that was a lot of grief because moving from home to home, and he was just another kid in the house. I really believe that is earning sitting down with them. And whenever they feel ready to talk, because sometimes it's just our presence, we're ministering with our presence and just being present and letting you know, I'm here for you. It got to a point where they would feel more and more comfortable. They would lay in my aunt's bed and we'll be surrounded him. And then we're talking about, I broke up with X, Y, and Z and crying. And we would be right there. And it's like, oh my God, like a gossip party. And we're just like surrounding and saying, oh my gosh, she's so terrible. I'm glad it didn't work. And then a week later, they're back together. Like, oh my gosh, why would you go back with this girl? And then it was part of that, allowing them to be sad whenever they felt sad, but welcoming them into the home. My aunt even told me, there are things that can be so simple, but can make a huge difference, where she knew that one of them would be having a hard day, so she would cook for them something that she knew that they liked to help them feel better, allowing them to use the kitchen and not just saying, oh, you can only have like ham and that's all you can do, but you can't have chicken, you can't have shrimp, all of this is for family and this is for you. No, allowing them to have access to everything, because we are opening our homes and they're part of us. So there's no, this is you, because there will be times where we hear stories like the family would be in the dining room table and then they would be in this like outside in this table that was set up for them. Now, should there be boundaries? Absolutely. We can't just be like, whatever you want at 3:00 in the morning and all that stuff, but let's talk about it and say you have access to everything, because at the end of the day, each parent is deciding to open their home. And it's a ministry. You're serving children who are very vulnerable. And when you have the ability to earn their trust and they come to you and they tell you, I had such a crappy day, and they're able to tell you about that crappy day, that's building relationship. And that is the most gratifying thing. And I think that's what's important for parents to know. Just help them feel a part of your family, however that looks like to you.
Go ahead, Lakeisha. I know I'm clapping, you're nodding. Go ahead.
Where do we start? Oh my goodness, there were so many helpful tips. Things that I feel like Myra and myself have been saying forever. But overall, like you mentioned, making them feel like part of your family. I love the fact that you mentioned that your aunt allowed them to even come to their bed and basically pour out how they're feeling about breakups or anything that they're having. And it reminded me, there is a foster mom that we follow on social media, and she adopted a teenager. And in the video, it showed, do you know who I'm talking about, Myra, right? In the video, she just was so playful with him and they would sit on the couch together and just kind of like do this wrestling maneuver, right? And to me, that was so beautiful. And that's what it reminded me of when you said that, because I feel like a lot of people, first of all, they're fearful to take in a teenager, let alone do, God forbid, but stuff like that with the teenager, because they have this stereotype. They weren't with them from birth to even act this way as they grow up. So, but what they're missing is this is what they need. A lot of them are seeking this. So when I hear of these like just random acts that you can do in your home that mean maybe nothing to us, right? It's like, oh, this is
Mm-hmm.
how we live, this is how we love, but we're taking that time and just pouring love into them in that way. That's stuff they will never forget. Being
Mm-hmm.
silly with them, that speaks volumes. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, my aunt, she reminded me. But we did. And then it's just, I think it's like it goes back to how would I want to be treated? How would I want to be if I was a child and so much has happened in my life, and then somebody comes and appropriately touches my shoulder, say, we're here for you, we got you. You want to go to the kitchen? Go for it. Were you going to make a recipe? Go for it. You want to achieve this goal? There was another one. It was this, he wanted to be a chef. And his assigned social worker said, forget it, you're not going to have it. And he came and I remember we were in the house and he just fell to the floor and he was weeping because that was his goal, to be a chef. And the social worker said, we're not going to help you financially to achieve that goal. And my aunt said, oh no, you are going to achieve this goal. I believe in you. So what you're going to do is you're going to go and you're going to obtain all the information that you need. You have a court coming up and you're going to tell them your plan. And we're going to be praying because we're like a family of faith. And we're going to be praying and you're going to get everything that you need. And you're going to go to that court and you're going to tell that judge that this is your dream and this is what you need. And this is the research that you've done. And he looked up and he was like, but the social was like, forget about her. It doesn't matter what she has to say. We're going to do this. And he went to the court and the judge backed him up 100% and paid for his school. So that was a parent that said to her kid in her home, you're going to achieve that goal and we're going to back you up. So I think those are the things that make the world of a difference.
You can change the world by changing the world of one child. Like this, I cannot make an impact to an entire earth. It's geologically impossible, right? For me to be making an impact in an entire world. But I can make a world of difference in the life of one human being that I get to touch. And then that human being gets to make the world of a difference to another human being. And then it becomes this beautiful domino effect of someone saying, had it not been for that person, right? Because what you're saying right now, like I'm getting the chills thinking about it, because had it not been for people in my life that said, I know what the statistics say, and I know what you should be or where you should be, but I'm going to say that you can be something different, I wouldn't be sitting here right now having this conversation. But somebody said, Myra, don't care what anybody else says. I'm telling you that you can do this, right? And here I am. Who knows what that would have done? And I'm thinking of some of the youth that we've worked with. I'm thinking of some of the youth that we had to advocate for against the system, against everything else. That's why Lakeisha and I are nodding and clapping for what you're saying, because we've been social workers on cases where we're saying, this doesn't sound right, and I'm going to call somebody else because this child deserves to be in a different home, or this child deserves X, Y, or Z, right? And so there's so much intentionality. And this is why ministering over fostering, and this is why Lakeisha and I, we are also people of faith, and we've already been praying over our future foster parents that will one day come through our doors, because we're looking for foster parents or resource parents that are going to see foster care as a ministry. And ministry means to serve. It's not just providing basic needs. It's so much more than providing basic needs. That's just the minimum standard of care. I'm talking about being present. I'm talking about introducing these kids to, I mean, your aunt introduced these kids to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have these stories, right? So there's a whole family that's involved in the love and care of these children. Now, I do want to say in this space that we know we have to be very respectful of the children and youth in the home. And this process may be different for every single one of them. Some of them may be a little more guarded. Some of them may be a little more defensive of this because maybe they have thought they were safe in previous homes and then they weren't. And so this process may not happen right away, right? The surprise birthday party may not happen right away. You may have to work at it. Each child is going to be different. But the fact that you can have a space where this intentionality can be, I mean, oh my goodness. Yeah, this is just an amazing conversation. So I appreciate you bringing these stories because we need people to hear this side of foster care.
One of the things that my aunt told me, that a lot of people shy away from the teens because, our perceptions. So it's just meeting them where they are. If they're not ready to be a part of a family gathering, it's okay. Maybe they're ready to have a cup of whatever, tea, coffee with you one-on-one. So it's allowing them to have some sense of control of what is it that I feel safe with. And then from there, if they're ready, then you can build up. But just the power, there's a difference when I show up and I care. And we cannot fake that. So that in its own is helping build that relationship, is building relationship. I love my supervisor. She says relationship over agenda. And I might have my agenda of what I want and how it looks like, but it's relationship over agenda.
I love that. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying before about the young person that wanted to be the chef. And this makes me think exactly what you just brought up, relationship over agenda, because I was just getting ready to say it's about the person, not who's on your caseload, not another youth that entered your house through the foster care system. Everybody is different. And I think that if everybody just takes a moment and they really get to know the child and they're supporting them for when they will open up, that's when the healing process will start to happen. Because a lot of times we're putting them in the same boat. We are categorizing them. This is just another child, on this caseload. Oh, another child is getting ready to enter my home. I'm going to use the same bedding that I used for the next child. I'm going to use the same things. And we're not customizing, the items for the kids. We're not supporting them in a way that they fully needed. And this has to change. So thank you to your family for thinking outside the box.
Yeah. It's very rewarding when they trust you. Yeah. It's so rewarding because that's something that you work for. You earn trust. You can't buy trust, but it's those small details. And when you look back, and this is what I say, that people who are dying have taught me how to live, because at the end of our life, what we're going to look back on is not how much money did I have in the bank account. It's not going to be how many trips did I make? Did I travel the world? Did I do X, Y, and Z? No, it's going to be back to how did I impact? What's my legacy? So if I'm choosing to be a resource parent, that's the legacy that I'm going to leave with so many children and their generations that follow them. And if we are allowed to die at old age, and we know that we're entering that end of life, then we can look back and say, wow, I serve with everything when I can. And that brings so much peace and reward as my experience just serving in the role that I currently serve in. That brings so much reward and peace, and say, I've lived a good life, and not with regrets that unfortunately I've seen, that I thought this was important, but it really wasn't.
Yeah. Well, Yeny, we really wish that we had another hour with you, because I think that there's so much that we would love to continue, but our time is coming to an end, and we have introduced a question that we feel is the most beautiful way to end our Ministering Over Fostering episodes. And this is where we talk specifically and directly to our youth, because they do watch, and we then get them in the office for coffee and they tell us what they heard and what they thought of. And so I think this is the piece that we look forward to the most. And so what advice would you give to our youth who may be navigating with grief and loss, or maybe they didn't even know that they were navigating grief and loss, and after hearing your lesson today, they're like, oh, I actually do have grief. I've experienced things, and I didn't even know that that's what it was. What would you give them as advice?
So I would say that acknowledging what's happening is very powerful, because it allows us to then be able to do something with what's hurting us, as opposed to something hurting us and not knowing that it is, and then we live our lives where we carry this pain. I really believe that with grief, it's a process that evolves as long as I work with it. So it doesn't have to have the same power over me and heaviness over me if I allow myself the opportunity to enter a conversation. It might be with somebody, it might be with you ladies, where they sit down and say, I think I'm experiencing this. And from there, there's much growth. I think that it really goes back to what we were talking earlier of saying, this is my story. I didn't get to choose it. If I had the opportunity to select what happened to me as a child, it would have looked different. But this is my story. And this is where I'm at. And now I have the control of saying, what am I going to do with it? And that's where the control is. So that in time and working and talking, then I can find meaning. Because I have seen and I have experienced that when I go through something, then I can turn around to someone else and say, you know what? I can understand what you're going through. I might not know exactly how you feel, because each person only knows what they're feeling. But what I can say is, this is my story. And if I can do it, you can do it too. And I think that's the hope. And that is something that I would advise you to do if you're experiencing grief and loss. And maybe you don't know what type of pain you're experiencing. It's okay, because then you can talk to someone to help you through that process, to kind of look at it and bring it forth. And sometimes it's scary to do this by ourselves, but we don't have to, because there's support and resources available.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yeny, for all of your wisdom, all of your knowledge. even just your voice and the way you speak is so relaxing. Like we could be here another hour and I would be okay with that. But I just want to thank you for your time, for what you do, for how you serve others, and for what you've taught us today and what you've taught our resource parents, but most importantly, what you've taught our youth. I think they're going to have a wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure we're going to receive some phone calls later. But please thank your aunt for us, for all of the children that walk through her doors that she impacted, because we know that finding foster parents who serve above the minimum standard are very scarce. And when we find one, we love to say thank you, because we know that all of the children that have walked through those doors have a better opportunity because of how safe they were in that home. So please thank her for us.
I was going to say thank you so much just for the words of encouragement, direction that you provided. And I agree 100% with Myra. Your voice is very calming. So you are definitely in the right profession. But honestly, your spirit, I don't know you as well as Myra, but your spirit, you just have a very loving spirit. And just thank you so much for coming on here and just being a voice for those kids and those stories that you shared with us.
Thank you so much, Lee, for your kind words, and it's an honor to be here. I'm passionate about this because it's a part of life. Grief and loss is a part of life.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you, Yeny. Thank you so much for all of your time and everything. Thank you all to those who are watching and who are here. And we cannot wait to see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.